now that we're talking about Twitter and Facebook, in this country, plus WhatsApp, hey, when it comes to, spreading of news, both real and fake, these are the platforms, and they've been used. And there are very many times nowadays when you receive some information, it looks like a very good statement. It looks actually like a gazette notice signed by the Minister for Interior declaring tomorrow a public holiday. For what reason? Because you're celebrating CT Day or whatever. And it looks genuine until you see another one now circulating again with a stamp, fake. And you just wonder, so at what point do I know what's real, what's fake, what's true, what's not true?
There's one realm of information that I think is going to not just perplex, but is going to impoverish very many Kenyans. It is the masking of get-rich-quick schemes that present themselves either as opportunities to invest, opportunities to purchase things in the same way people purchase things from Amazon and other such online platforms. And some even use a name that is actually a household name like Amazon, and people believe, this ought to be true. And people, because you have the capacity to simply send money through your phone, people send money. And lo and behold, at some point you find the administrators of that particular site are no longer visible. And what is also not visible is your money. It is also not visible.
It's also not visible. Others, you'll go online and you find a job that has been advertised, all right? So, and it says you can contact this number, or you send an email to this, you send your application to this, and then you receive feedback and you're told, send this amount of money. It's a non-refundable application fee. Non-refundable application fee. Some people even send a non-refundable application fee. You receive another email or call inviting you to an interview. There's a story of this particular lady who was arrested by the DCI last week, working with the prisons department, and others who are being taken to court today. And the allegation by the DCI is that they have swindled people millions of shillings.
Over a period of time.
Many of these through online and then word of mouth. So online is basically becoming one of those places that are just dangerous to operate in, especially if you're just not careful. So let's bring in that conversation about the psychology behind misinformation and how to tell real from fake. Mbivu na mbichi. To discuss that is Eric Mugendi. Eric is an expert on these matters of fact-checking, of journalism for good. He's done this for a while. He's now an African program manager for an organization called Midan. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
So what is Midan? Tell us about it.
So Midan is a technology nonprofit that works with journalists and other organizations working in the human rights space, basically to give them tools and enable them to do their work better and try to get them to empower as many people as they can. So basically we work with organizations that are active in holding public figures to account, and also people who work in the space that try as much as possible to get people to realize exactly what their place is in society and how they can leverage tools that are available to them to hold governments to account, and then also to make their lives better, essentially.
So it's mostly fact-checking, and it's looking at the kind of fact-checking that we've seen is when a political leader makes a speech, and then people now, such as yourselves, go back and dig, is this true? Had they said this before? Had they said something contrary before? If, for example, the president says that in the last, until 2013, the number of projects that have been initiated by all the successive governments are half what the Jubilee government has initiated in the last 8 years. Is that true? Is that not true? So it's mainly for that.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's also just the fact that a lot of information people are consuming isn't verified, especially now that people are moving more from traditional media to new media platforms and messaging apps to get the sources of information. So as people get more varied sources of information, which aren't necessarily put to the same kind of rigorous test as it would happen previously with mainstream media, we've seen a need for people to essentially do like a smell test, like a check of this information. So that's why I think fact-checking has become much more visible, and we've seen more fact-checking organizations come up to occupy this space, and then also we've seen mainstream and traditional media outlets essentially set up like verification and fact-checking initiatives internally as well.
I mean, we look at some of this information, and it sometimes borders on the dangerous, especially when we look at things like health, when we look at things like security, can be dangerous. So if you're dealing, we talked about WhatsApp, for example.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with information that goes from individual to individual, whether it's groups or not, you probably will not have that fact-checking entity in place that you would for a media house, for example. So these are individuals who then are getting this information. How do you know if somebody is sending this information and it spreads like wildfire? Send a WhatsApp message now by 8 o'clock. People all over the country would have it.
Yeah.
The world possibly would have it.
Yeah.
How then can you check if you don't have an entity set up?
Okay. So I think one of the other things that a lot of these fact-checking organizations are doing, and then also the people we work with are doing, is also media and information literacy, so that you empower the people consuming this information to know that, for example, if someone sends you an image and tells you this is an image that was taken at, let's say, on Mombasa Road 5 minutes ago showing an accident, and then there's tools that you can use to actually see, has this image been published before? Has it been taken out of context? Or has it been manipulated in a certain way? Because a lot of times the best point of contact for fact-checking is at the point of consuming that information. And fact-checkers can't always be there. But then if you know as a consumer of information that if you're getting information from, let's say, someone posts a tweet and then it goes viral, and then that becomes like your one source of information, then it becomes really hard for now the fact checker to come after the fact to sort of undo this messaging. Yeah. So just ensuring that the people consuming this information are aware that there's ways for them to verify, that they don't have to take things at face value. And that, I think, we've seen a lot of this, especially with the pandemic, with lots of people saying that initially there were reports that black people are immune, that because we live in a hot country or climate is generally warm, it's not really likely to spread here. Or even things like if you drink hot water, or like if you gargle with hot water and salt, it's going to wash the virus and then you're not going to be affected. And then because of this information vacuum, because I think that is one really huge contributor to the spread of false information. It's these information vacuums, what we call mid-information, where there isn't enough information for people to actually act on. But because of this resulting space, that people will then start filling it with their own sort of like half-baked truths or things that have some basis in truth but aren't really like completely true.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, Eric, there are organizations whose entire mandate is to churn out fake news and information.
Yeah.
That's why they've been set up. They're heavily funded.
Yeah.
We know some of the Eastern European nations are, I mean, it's not a secret about what they do. And then there are those who are then at the same time fighting this news and information.
Yeah.
So whereas you have those bodies who are trying to make sure that people are made aware that there's a possibility that some of this information you get is fake, there are those who are spending every waking hour churning out all this.
Yeah.
So how do you draw a line then between saying we're trying to make sure that it seems like a lot of work to do?
Yeah.
Because as you dispel one myth by giving out
There's
the
a
right
new one that
information,
comes
there's
up.
another one that's coming.
Yeah. So I think actually, in addition to just the fact checking verification, there's also this thing called coordinated inauthentic behavior. And I think that's what you're talking about, where you have like people who've devoted resources to churning out content. And then the thing with a lot of, especially for social media platforms, is it's really easy to figure out the things that someone is interested in or that someone likes, or that, let's say, to figure out someone's political leanings, even just looking at the kind of comments or the kind of content they respond to.
Right.
So you might have, for example, two stories, essentially covering the same thing, but then one is positive, one is negative. So if you react to something negatively, they know, okay, this is where this person's opinions lie. So they start leading you down a path where you start seeing more and more content, and then it leads you into this thing called it's an information bubble. It's where you don't really see contradicting information.
Yep.
So essentially, it becomes self-enforcing.
Yep.
And then one of the things, like there's a number of organizations that have sort of come up with ways to detect this kind of coordinated behavior, because sometimes it's something as basic as figuring out what time they're active.
Right.
So you see, like, if let's say they work from 9 to 1, and then they take a break from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 4 they're still working, and then you figure out that this particular organization is based in this time zone. So that's how you're able to map that. Like I think the one of the most visible examples is Macedonia, where a lot of the pro-Trump false information is being generated from.
Yes.
And then they're able to figure out that this is where this information is coming from. These are the IP addresses, these are the websites producing this information. And then they give this information to the platforms and tell them, these are people who are trying to game the system in order to gain financially, because there's a lot of money to be made in getting people to look at certain websites. And then that financial incentive is also one way that we've seen false information being weaponized. And by essentially taking people down certain paths and ensuring that their beliefs are reinforced, it has really dangerous real-world consequences. So, for example, you've seen instances where people will, like the example that Eric mentioned about sending money to some number because you've seen it's a job that's been published on a website that looks very similar to a certain famous brand. So people have mastered the trick of like preying on desperation. So even in situations where people have like incurable or chronic conditions, and then you start seeing websites offering cures and then telling you need to send money to this person, and then you're going to get like access to whatever medication that they're offering you. So just the way people respond in certain ways to fear, like motivations of fear, has been weaponized and has been manipulated. And then to make it worse, just the fact that regulators and governments are really slow to respond. Because first of all, they generally do not have a clue what these things look like or what they can do. But then at the end of it, you have a bunch of people who have these motivations to spread this content and able to navigate through these cracks and these spaces, and the fact that you can stay anonymous online and you can hide yourself and you can hide your identity, and then they're able to identify the people most likely to respond to this false information. And then which leads to this thing called it's called the backfire effect, where you can present someone with a fact check, essentially debunking the thing that they've seen. But they will still insist that
It's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
So you look at people like flat earthers, people who believe that the earth is flat. Even when they're presented with all of this evidence that the earth is round, they still say, oh, there's a conspiracy. Because our brains are designed to identify patterns and to connect with certain things. So
Eric, are you saying the world is round?
I am saying the world is round.
Okay.
There's an abundance of evidence that the earth is actually a sphere.
Flat.
Yeah. So basically,
gone.
yeah, exactly. Like you have, now, and that's the thing. That's another trick that people who spread false information will use. They will make it the job of the person who's contradicting them to prove their point.
Yep.
So like, it's not me. It's not my job
If
to
you
come
dispute
into
what I'm saying,
yeah,
you provide the evidence.
you provide the evidence
to the
because me,
contrary.
I know that what I believe is true.
Yeah.
So it becomes like it's a very self-defeating task.
But consider this, Eric, for a single second. The purveyors of what we are now referring to as false information don't really have that difficult a task to achieve their end or their goal.
Yeah.
Because we, as human beings, we are already primed to consume information that appeals to us without determining its veracity, without determining its authenticity, without determining anything, so long as it appeals to us.
Yeah.
Now, what we are now calling false information has been resident and alive in the political sphere for the longest time. One sees it in this country being practiced on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Someone decides and makes a statement. Now, if it appeals to the hearer, and they choose very, very carefully how they present it,
Yeah.
it is believed because it feeds into either the fears, the anticipations, the expectations, the hopes. So once it is captured, someone is unlikely to move away from this information that they have accepted. And they are the ones who are actually going to resist anyone who comes and says, actually, this may not necessarily be true.
Yeah.
They will protect that false information. And it is them also who help purvey it.
Yeah.
And because they will find fertile ground in people who are already inclined towards thinking and believing that way.
Exactly.
For instance, when we heard about vaccines and the naysayers of vaccines, how did it find such fertile ground and how did it suddenly become a serious conversation? It's because you had people who are known to be medical doctors. That's one.
Yeah.
Not pretending to be, they're medical doctors.
Yeah.
Two, there are people who subscribe to a certain faith.
Yeah.
It made it potent.
Yeah.
Because someone would say, wait, but this is a person of faith, and then they are doctors. Now, no one is going to ask, and what is his specialty?
Yeah.
What discipline does he specialize in? Is this person an epidemiologist? They won't ask. Doctor. They must know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so it continues.
It continues.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess there are levels and layers of fake news. There's what we can say would be deliberate misinformation
Yeah.
with commercial motivation,
Yeah.
where you basically, like you said, an organization is set up and it wants to send deliberate misinformation so that it can make money in some way down the road. Somebody else or another organization that would now be sending out fake news, just deliberate mischief.
Yeah.
Or somebody may be spreading fake news, but it's truly what they believe. It's not, as far as they're concerned, it's not fake news.
Yeah.
I believe that this is a mug, and therefore I'm just saying this is a mug. You don't believe me, but I genuinely believe what I'm saying to be true. How do you distinguish those? And at what point then do you also now start as a consumer of information, not just online? At what point do you start questioning? Are we now getting to a point where we question everything that we see?
I think the thing
You come and tell me your name is Eric, and I'm like,
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get what you mean. Yeah. Because a lot of times the way these things are spread is initially as targeted and manipulated false information that is intended to achieve a certain goal, but then eventually they do cross over into the threshold where the intention is not to deceive, but it's because the person sharing this information generally believes that it's true. And that's when there's these two different categorizations. So disinformation is deliberate and manipulated false information, which is intended to achieve a certain goal. And then misinformation is now when the intent isn't necessarily clear or the person spreading this information isn't doing it in bad faith. And that's where it becomes really important now to sort of intervene when it's still when it's easy to identify the person or the source of this information, because once it goes out into the populace, once it starts going viral, it's really hard now to start containing it, because then once it resonates with someone and they become like an active advocate for this false information, then it becomes really hard to undo this kind of damage. So what ends up happening eventually is you find that people will try to even act in order to contain this information, especially for fact checkers. But then if you look at the nature of these platforms where this information is spreading, it's really hard to track it. So you have messaging platforms with end-to-end encryption. So by the time you're getting this message, you don't know if it's gone to one person or to 100 people. Or even if you're able to now respond to the person who sent this information, they'll say, oh, I got it in a group, or like someone sent this group. And then there was this one, I think it's one of the most annoying things that people could add to messages saying forwarded as received, where you're like, it's not me. If it's bad, it's not me. If it's good, I will take credit for it. But if it's bad, it was not my intention. So people will act and respond to these things, but what ends up happening is you lose that chain once the messaging starts going out and starts spreading. But what we've seen is, for example, at Midan, what we do is we work with fact-checking organizations to set up tip lines. So a tip line is essentially like a number that someone can send a piece of false information to. And then a fact checker will look at it and then respond to them and tell them, yes, this is false, or this isn't. And then they'll give this, they'll present the evidence and say, we've looked into it and then we found that this is false because of this and this reason. And then you can take that message as a recipient of this particular communication and then send it back to wherever you got it and then hope for the best. So I think now it's just hopes and vibes and just hoping that whoever sees this thing really believes that the message that they've gotten. And at the end of it, it's entirely up to the consumer of the information to take this action, which I think is a failure, especially for the way these platforms work. Because you look at a platform like Facebook, which says that they're not a publisher. So they will not take, they've repeatedly said they won't take action on content because it's not theirs, it's their users. And then they're protected by certain laws. I think there's one particular, there's a particular law that says a platform isn't responsible for the content on it. But what they're trying to do, they're trying to sort of intervene by empowering the work of fact-checking organizations by giving them access to signals, so things like virality or comments or how people are reacting to false information. But even that is still fairly small. So if you look at the kind of reach that fact checks have, it can be really small compared to the reach that false information has. So I think the bigger task on containing this false information is on the recipient, the person who's getting this information. So that's why one of the things that we're trying to push for is for conscious consumption, for people to slow down the speed at which they consume information, because we're inundated with so much noise on a regular basis. Like you open an app and then literally it's a stream.
So should you be conscious about how much you take in, or should you be careful about how you consume it, because it's going to come at you? If your phone is on, for example, and your apps are active, this information is going to come. Or then should we be saying that there are certain tests that you should take the information through? And if so, what are we telling people? Because I mean, I think about it like, drug test, the little thing, they put a substance, if it turns green, it's heroin. Don't ask me how I know that. But you get this information and then you say, I'm going to pass it through these 3 levels and then I know, okay, it's either true or it's not. Is that then not how we should be saying consume this information? As opposed to take it easy on how much you consume, then take it easy on how you consume it, then put it through this.
Okay, because I think it's actually a combination of both. So first of all, you need to just make sure that you're aware of what you're consuming, and especially if it's trying to make you act in a certain way, if it's trying to provoke a reaction. So a lot of times we see things being designed, like you find a headline being, or an article being shared because someone just saw the headline and they're like, oh, this is something that I really agree with, but then they haven't really read the article.
Of it, yes.
And then also we've seen situations where like the headline doesn't really agree with the content, but then because it's designed to provoke a certain reaction.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying like you need to slow down and actually look at it and become much more aware of exactly what the information says. And then also we need to be much more or we need to diversify our sources of information. So you're not just getting like your one source of information is the one that you believe in, and then all the others, you just relegate them to the background. So that if you get like a story that shows up on your timeline and it doesn't show up anywhere else, that is one thing that should sort of like trigger something. Like you need to be aware that this might not be the one, or this might not necessarily be true unless it's been covered in other places. And then also you need to look at how exactly it's been covered. And then also the other thing that we need to do is we need to be much more cognizant of the way information is presented. So if I say, for example, that like because 2 out of 4 people in this room are named Eric, that means 50% of the population of Kenya is named Eric, which you're like, that logically, like because of you such a small subset of 4 people to extrapolate it to 47 million people, you need to ask yourself, like, how did I make that logical leap from this one small subset to this really big group? And that is something that we saw during the pandemic. There was a time when there was a sample of, I think it was 18,000 samples of blood that were collected and tested for COVID antibodies. I think it was by Cambridge.
By Cambridge, yeah.
And then they took that data and they published a paper on it and said, we can therefore extrapolate, I think it was like 2% of the population has been exposed to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then a major newspaper said 4.7 million Kenyans have been exposed to COVID because of that one particular small sample.
Right.
And then it was on the front page, and the people were like, oh, could I have been exposed? So they were taking a very small subset and then extrapolating it and then not explaining that this was because it's really hard to put it in a headline.
So is that fake news?
It's taken out of context. So
But is it fake?
Does fall under fake news.
Okay.
Yes.
So even when something is taken out of context, even though it is based on facts,
Yeah.
right? Scientifically, now
Yeah.
those are facts.
Yeah.
Even if it's removed from the context within which it was being described or defined,
Yeah.
it is characterized then
Yeah.
or categorized as fake news.
Yeah, as long as that context is not explained,
Okay.
because then you're leading people to a false conclusion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then one gets the impression that fake news thrives on facts.
Yes.
It
There's an
thrives
element of
on
truth.
reality.
Yeah.
And it's just that they lend it an imaginative twist, which serves a greater goal other than propagating the truth.
Yeah, Donald Trump has appeared. He has spoken at a major event. Photos have circulated. Was he wearing his pants backwards or not?
Donald Trump has not been paying his taxes, yet he claims he has been paying his taxes.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a multi-billionaire. Donald Trump is bankrupt. Now,
All these.
All
Time for
this.
us to take a break. 28 minutes to 8 o'clock. We are discussing fake news, the psychology behind misinformation. Helping us to unravel and unpack this particular conversation is Eric Mugendi. He is an African program manager at Midan. It's a fact-checking platform. And we'll also ask you, are there fake fact-checkers? Well, you'll tell us this after the break.
87.9 Spice FM, Mombasa. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
Okay,
Mornings
20 minutes to 8.
done
The
right.
conversation between you,
94.4 Spice FM.
Latif, CT Muga, Nduoko, and Eric Mugendi, African program manager at Midan, a fact-checking organization. So how do we know that yours is real?
So there's this thing called the International Fact-Checking Network, whose job it is to set standards for fact-checking organizations and then also make sure that everyone who's doing the work of fact-checking, everyone who claims to do the work of fact-checking actually adheres to these standards. So they require fact-checkers to declare their methodology. So they need to say how exactly they do their work, where they get their funding from as well, and also how the people on their teams. So they need to show everyone, or they need to publish at least, this information. And these standards of transparency are so that the people who consume these fact checks know exactly where the information is coming from and how how it was generated and who the people producing this information are.
people who purvey fake news, false information, false news, clearly have created an industry, and by all accounts, it's a growth industry. How then do we know that people like yourselves who present themselves as fact checkers and people who check facts are not in cahoots with these people?
Are not also the same people?
Yes, because this industry
Yeah.
seems to have given birth to this other industry.
And this industry thrives.
On this other industry.
Yes.
Yes, because in the absence of these purveyors of fake false news,
Yeah.
people in this under industry, may
Yeah,
have.
because who's feeding who? It's like the anti-vaxxers. There are many anti-vaxxers who actually vaccinate their people to the hilt.
Yes.
So so that they can now get information in terms of what's happening on this other side. How do you divide?
Because I think at some level, it depends on the systems in which you operate. Because I think Kenya is fairly fortunate in terms of freedom of the media, where we can have fact-checking organizations or people who do the work of fact-checking. Because we've seen in other situations in other countries where governments have come out and said, we are the fact-checkers. Like you've seen situations where governments will come up and say, it's our job to regulate the information people are consuming as a matter of public interest. So because they'll say, we love you so much, we need to make sure that you're not consuming anything false. And this then becomes a way to sort of crack down on dissent. But I think it's really important for people to not just take the work of fact checkers at face value, because that's why one of the things that the fact checking network requires is for methodology to be shared, so that the person consuming this information is able to arrive at the same conclusion for themselves. And if they're not, then they can raise a question and ask, like, how are we not arriving at the same kind of conclusion as the fact checker? So the way the system has been for the longest time is that you would have the media as a conduit of information to the public. But then as, again, people start getting more of the information from outside of mainstream media, outside of mainstream outlets, it's become really important for the person consuming this information to become empowered to do the same kind of work. So that's where, like, the fact checkers aren't necessarily here to, like, make sure that people don't just filter information for everyone, because that is impossible to do and it's a lot of work. So the ultimate goal of fact checking is to make itself obsolete, actually, so that we don't have a situation where you have to get someone to verify the information you're consuming and that you're able to do it on your own.
Well, but traditionally, even if we look at just in a village, how do people consume information? You will find there are people who are known to be rumor mongers, and then there are people who are known to be influencers in the community, and they'll be the ones who you rely on for the truth.
Yeah.
The same thing about the legacy media. Legacy media has for a long time been known as, if this information is actually shared on Spice FM, then there's a higher likelihood that this is the truth. Now, here we are on these other platforms. Fact checkers, such as yourselves, are operating not within the platform, but like on a side. But I'm consuming the information on this platform.
Yeah.
How does the platform then reach out to you? How do I reach out to you as a fact checker to know that whatever I'm consuming is being verified as I go? Because that's the thing. I just need to know that if I hear information from Ndu, I will go and ask somebody else, my neighbor in the village, have you heard? Is it true? Has it been verified? And then I will continue.
Yeah.
So that other person is a fact checker.
Yeah.
In this particular case, how do we do that?
So I think one of the things is we need to establish what the indicators of trust are. Like, how do you then communicate the fact that this information is accurate and it's verified? So, for example, if you're able to back it up with evidence. So a lot of times people will consume information and then they will ask, but how did you know? Like, what is your proof? So it's not possible for you to share a post, or for example, for me to go, I could go on Twitter and just post something and say that I am at Spice FM, and then someone will ask, like, but do you have a picture, or do you have something to show that you're actually there? So we're getting to a point where people don't take things at face value, which is really interesting. And I think this is a function of just how skeptical we've become. And I think it's also a function of media and information literacy, where people don't necessarily take the things that they see as hard facts, but they're more likely to ask, like, support your statement, support the thing that you're saying. So I think one of the things that we also need to be aware of is that some of these indicators of trust have been abused. Like, we've seen people getting verified on social media, but at the same time they're publishing false information because the platforms or the people making these decisions are not necessarily part of the ecosystem in which these people are operating in. So at the same time, we need to be skeptical of these things that have been established as standards. It becomes like a slippery slope, like a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't end.
Right.
Yeah.
So, could one say that fake news has been around for the very longest of times? It's just that now systems have become vigilant. Because people would have used...
We've given it a label.
Right, we named
We've
it as something,
characterized
characterized
it,
it, and then,
and we've packaged it.
Right.
Yes.
But it has
always
been
been
around.
there.
It has been
It has
there.
been there for the longest
time,
time.
and people would have used it. I mean, we saw in the 1940s, as history would tell us, that people used propaganda in ways that fueled world wars. So even then, it was being used as a tool.
Yeah.
It's not a new way of doing things, but now it's just that it's been given a new name and
It's been given a label.
put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Think of oral narratives that communities had, and some of the stories that children were told to sort of like protect them, say, from the night.
Yeah.
they would peddle false news.
You don't whistle in the night.
Yes.
Yeah, but in a situation
You'll
like
call
that,
the animal.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, this dreaded animal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every time it got dark, you really didn't want to venture out because you
Or
didn't
open your
want to
mouth.
encounter. Yes, or call a leopard by its name.
Yeah.
You call it a thing, or call a snake by its
its
name.
Yeah.
False information.
Whereas your parents could have told you, just don't go out at night.
And how would that have worked?
See, that's the thing.
It's
The
psychology.
same thing with this propaganda is that people believe, whether it's politics, whether it's the art of war, whatever it is, that if people thought that they could just present you with the information as it is, you're less likely to believe it or imbibe it. But if they gave you something more sensational, that is then when you would follow.
Or we seem to justify it, or whatever false information, by the intent. So if we agree and we accept that the intention is good and noble, then it is justifiably okay for you to purvey the false information. Yes.
So there's this thing, actually what you're describing is called motivated reasoning, where you're using a certain reason to reinforce a certain belief. So you're using the fact that if you go out at night, you're likely to get attacked, but then you can't tell someone, don't go out, you're likely to get attacked by an animal. But it becomes like you add like an extra layer of credibility to this particular thing. So again, it gets down to intent, because we've seen things like propaganda and the kind of messaging being used to incite people to violence. And the way, because human beings have a very complex relationship with information. So one thing is, we are much more likely to agree with things that, or to believe in things that agree with our beliefs or reinforce our beliefs, or disagree with things that don't necessarily align with what we believe in. So that's how I am much more likely to believe something that is false but agrees or reinforces a belief that I'm already holding, versus something that's true that contradicts something that I may believe in. And I think this is one thing that we've also tried to make people more aware of, because the moment information tries to get you to respond or react in a certain way, especially if it's a knee-jerk reaction, and if it's like an emotional type reaction that doesn't necessarily have a basis in logic, but because it's something that you hold near and dear to you, then it becomes kind of dangerous. And this has been manipulated and weaponized in lots of ways, like inciting people to war and trying to get people to not take that time to actually pause and question it. So if, for example, I start like a certain rumor about someone, this is like, it's literally false information. But if there's someone who's like a social outcast, and then I say, because this person has or speaks a certain language or acts a certain way, then they're probably like a genie, or that there's something mysterious about them.
Yep.
And then that starts being propagated, and it starts becoming a belief, and then this person essentially becomes ostracized from society. Then that is me essentially riding on people's existing prejudices to get them to react in that way. And I think that is one thing that the way now fake news has become much more prevalent is through weaponizing these kinds of I'd say neural connections in our brains, because it's turbocharged by the fact that you can target someone very specifically using their likes and using the interactions on social media to get them to respond and react in a certain way. And then it's happening at such a huge scale, which was not really possible like before the internet became as widespread. So you know that you can exactly pinpoint someone's physical location, you can tell who they're with, what this person believes in, and what these other people around him are likely to believe because of this particular set of data, which you provide willingly to social media
But
platforms.
would you not also say that we are hardwired to actually succumb to these things? For
Yeah,
the
That's
simple
how we
reason-
are.
Yeah.
Yes, because if you look at, for instance, how it is we take in our information, we often rely on the source. If an authoritative figure, right from the time we're children, lends you to understand the world in a certain way, you're already that way inclined.
Yeah.
And if you look at social norms, which in and of themselves are held by people, but which by intent, content, and practice are negative. For instance, the grouping of people and saying, this type of person, these type of people, you grow up, you may think you have overcome it, but it forms a foundation from which you look
Which
at
you
the
will
world.
take everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's something that's really difficult to unlearn a lot of
Yes.
times. Yeah.
Yes. So if, for instance, an authoritative figure, even you as an adult who's supposed to be a thinker and able to discern certain things, but so long as you have somebody who you consider to be an authoritative figure, and in our case, it's often the political class. I really have to hold my tongue.
I saw you. I saw that, and I was
Yes.
like, "Wow, impressive!" Yeah.
Yeah.
Impressive, huh? So you find that everything else that we're saying here actually finds very fertile ground.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it seems we're
already conditioned that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just give you an example. This weekend, Donald Trump went to a meeting, and photos emerged of Donald Trump and what he was wearing, creased pants, and it looked like he was wearing those pants backwards. Now, very credible news platforms were actually sharing this and either saying directly, Donald Trump appears to have worn his pants backwards, or asking, did Donald Trump wear his pants backwards?
Yeah.
So if the Newsweek posts an article asking, did Donald Trump wear his pants backwards?
The answer is he was wearing his pants backwards.
And they put a photo.
Yeah.
What's
they're
it likely to
saying-
be?
Yeah, they're
That's what they're
guiding you
saying.
down that
They're
path.
basically
Yeah.
telling you that
Yeah.
Donald Trump was wearing his pants.
backward.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at that, if you just search Donald Trump and pants, you will see that a lot of now those publications are posting stories saying fact checkers declare Trump was not wearing pants backwards.
Yeah.
But this is after
It's
the
after, yeah.
initial day where the same platforms were saying, did Donald Trump have his pants backwards?
Yeah.
Now, you are consuming this from really a credible source,
Yeah.
such as, one of the biggest news platforms in the world. At what point then do we say, okay, so because fact checkers have come and said, maybe this platform should apologize and say, okay, our headline should not have,
Yeah.
or maybe the platform should not have posted that story before going to the fact checker.
That's what I'm saying. It's a slippery slope because there's this one. It's a thing it's called appeal to authority, where because it's a respected person who's respected in one field makes a statement that is in a field that's not theirs, that's not their specialty, you assume that because they're an expert in one field, they're also able to speak authoritatively on another subject, which might not necessarily be true, which is why you find like economists talking about healthcare, or like talking like people talking about things that are not necessarily within that particular sphere. And then also the thing with fact checking is it's always reactive. It's always like we wait for someone to post something.
The fake news first.
Yeah, and then you react with a fact check. So that's why it's always like on the back foot. And then a lot of times the fact check essentially comes back and reminds people, or remember when this story was published and this was the thing that was said. Well, this is the fact. So it's it becomes like it becomes repetitive and it becomes monotonous a lot of times, because the work of undoing this harm or undoing this damage is really difficult, because you don't know if you're reaching the same people who are reached by that false information. And then at the same time, you're reinforcing someone's belief somewhere out there that
This is
obviously,
likely.
because you know that there's this perception that you can't be successful, you can't be visible without haters.
Yeah.
So then fact checkers become haters.
They're just haters.
Yeah.
Just haters.
Yeah.
So I asked you the question, who checks the fact checker? And you told us about this organization. Who pays the fact checkers?
Fact checkers have very interesting ways of raising revenue, some of which are problematic, actually. Like you find some of them do like fact-checking work on behalf of social media platforms, which is where this false information is circulating, and that becomes a source of revenue for them. But a lot of times we find that the funding they get tends to be from grants and from non-profits or people who want to support the work of accountability journalism.
Okay.
And then this is why one of the main requirements by the fact-checking network is transparency of funding, so that you don't essentially have this label on you that says you're getting money from George Soros, therefore you're acting in bad faith,
Yep.
and other things like those. Yeah, it becomes a really problematic situation where people have actually been attacked because they've gotten funding from an organization that has ties to someone who has ties to someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's because as it is now, fact checking doesn't really, it's not really profitable. It doesn't, it's really hard to like monetize.
monetize it.
Yeah, because essentially what you're doing is you're telling people that they're wrong, or you're telling people that they're wrong for believing in certain things. So just that becomes really hard. It's a really hard sell.
All right. So before we let you go, then Eric, speak to our audience, people who are consuming information left, right, and center from all platforms. What is it that you'd like to tell them? What it is that you'd like us to think about when you're consuming information?
Okay. So first of all, you need to diversify your information diet. You need to get your information from a variety of sources. Don't just rely on one and trust that one like 100%. And then also be skeptical when it comes to consuming information. Don't believe everything you read, especially if it's trying to get you to react or respond in a certain way. And then read beyond the headlines before you share certain things. And then don't rely on forwarded as received as sort of like a caveat to tell people that, well, I'm doing this in good faith. But I think the main thing that we need to do is to be much more, I'd say, media literate and media savvy, so that it's not possible for this false information to get past us. And we also need to be that guy. Like your aunt on your on your WhatsApp group is posting, like, we found that, I don't know, going out into the sun for vitamin D is curing COVID. And then they say some Dr. John from Johns Hopkins. And then you ask them, like, where did you actually get this? And did you actually take the time to verify this information? So to hold people accountable for what they share, and then to also be accountable for what you share. Because that's when it becomes really problematic, when this false information starts circulating and no one knows where it's coming from, but everyone knows where it's going because they will take it and share it in a certain group.
Yep.
Yeah. So be much more conscious about the information you consume, the information you share, and be much more aware of the tools that exist. So do like a reverse image search if it's a photo, or look at the website where this information is being shared if it's a link.
Thank you for you wanted to make a final comment.
I'm laughing because when he was talking about it, I was thinking about, this WhatsApp group that people add you to. It was some funeral contribution. And amidst all that, somebody then sends a clip about plots for sale.
Don't want to miss out the opportunity.
The response.
That wasn't as bad as Brother Ochola's.
Captive audiences, yeah.
Thank you very much, Eric, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Have a lovely day.
All right, you too.
Good evening, everybody. How you doing?
Spice FM.